Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your hosts, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, Evan Ginsberg, and Mike Leno. But tonight, this is a very special and unique show, and I would like to title it Not Another Hulk Hogan Death Show, if you want to put it in those terms. Because I think you're going to hear some things that are a little bit different than what you've been hearing over and over again from all the other talking heads. So, first of all, we don't have a full amount of time for Mike, so let's just hand it over to Mike to have Mike tell us what some of his personal thoughts are on the passing of Hulk Hogan.
Well, putting aside the disclaimer, some of the stuff that Hogan said and did in his later years, some X% of the population are upset by it, but just focusing, and I think that's what you and Russ can agree, let me know if you agree. We're focusing on his career as a performer, as the most recognizable. Everyone's saying, oh, he's the most recognizable guy ever in pro wrestling. Yeah, but prior to that, it was Gorgeous George. Gorgeous George, from late 50s on until about 1962, when he had health issues and finally had his head shaved, finally dropped his hair in a match with Dick Beyer, the Destroyer. But Hogan took it to way new level. I've heard other people.
Even before Hulk Hogan, sorry to interrupt, but I think even before Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant had done a lot to bring recognizability.
He was super recognizable, and he was on. Unfortunately, Johnny Carson wasn't there that night. It was Mike Douglas, I believe, as a sub. But he was doing all of these shows, later films. He was tremendously
$6 million
huge.
Man. He did the $6 million Man as
right?
Bigfoot.
Yes, right. But in Andre's case, he kind of broke. Evan will remember this. We had a series of guys like Happy Humphrey, who used to be driven around by Harley Race, who wasn't even a wrestler then, and Happy Humphrey helped him. I'm talking touring attractions. From about the 40s on, late 30s, we had what were then known as midget wrestlers, little people wrestlers, who were tremendous, great athletes, female wrestlers, doing sometimes outlaw shows, but they were touring attractions, on until this Hogan era. But then we had Haystack Calhoun and Man Mountain Mike and the Swedish Angel prior to them. So there were touring attractions, but Andre was the greatest touring attraction. Even Dusty Rhodes, around 77, 78, 79, he was working in Detroit. Obviously Mid-Atlantic and most of the NWA, but also for Vince Sr. And he was Roy Shire's last San Francisco United States champion. So Dusty was a great touring attraction. But Andre blew them all out of the water, meaning, going to work for different promotions and all of that. And then, of course, Japan and Europe. But Hogan, my first memory of Hogan, I had family in the Deep South and near Atlanta, Georgia, and near Chattanooga, etc. But I was able to have my grandfather drive me to, it's like maybe early '78, to Mobile, Alabama, for a show, because I'd heard, and I may be wrong on the year, it might be a little bit later, in '78. I haven't been able to find my program of it, but this was even before they went to Memphis for Jarrett and Lawler to get Hogan sort of finessed, after the Hiro Matsuda training in Florida, where Matsuda, stiffed and broke Hogan's leg, was what we were told. Mike Graham had verified that to me before he passed.
Well, remember we had Matsuda's daughter on too.
Yes, who I brought to the show because she had a book out. So Russ, let me just finish this because I'll lose my train of thought. So Hogan and Beefcake were then working under a variety of names, and I believe they were the Boulder Brothers on this Fields Family promotion. It was a great card, but they were like the opener, second from the bottom. And on top, the reason I was there was I was hearing all this stuff. So I've got to find the program for the exact month and year, but there were only 2 Freebirds then, and they were being, advertised not so much as the Freebirds, but as Gordy and Hayes. Buddy Roberts, who came in later as Buddy Jack Roberts, the third member of the Freebirds, was most famous for being one half of the original Hollywood Blondes, who started in Montreal. So it's Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts with Humperdinck as manager. They go to Florida twice, St. Louis, and they spent like 2.5 years in Los Angeles. But so Buddy Roberts came in later. So they're on top, and Hogan and Beefcake as these two no-name guys who are very, very super green, both skinny, we're there. And I'm looking also at some footage in Florida, after, I think it was still during the Matsuda training, but it almost looks like Pat Patterson, who had 2 stints for Eddie Graham in Florida, was helping work with Hogan. And I would later see him, Vern Gagne, when Roy Shire retired and exposed the biz to the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle newspapers in it's either January 81 or 82, after his last battle royal, which was tremendous. He had, 5 world champions, former world champions, plus Harley Race, then world champion. Anyway, when Roy finished up at his crown jewel, as he called it, his lead venue, and I was his ringside photographer for years, and like the only guy to ever be allowed to shoot backstage. But so Vern Gagne and Vince McMahon came in to pick the bones of the territory. Gagne was first, and Hogan I think on the second card there, and they would have one show a piece. AWA would have 1 show a month, WWF primarily at the Cow Palace, but Gagne brought in Hogan, and I saw, which nobody else in the AWA, because we would get their TV and it was confusing because Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson are heels, but in San Francisco, they're doing 6-mans to try to lend their credibility and help Hogan out. So they're the babyface team because they were babyfaces in the Bay Area, Northern California. And so Hogan is paired with them, whereas in most of the AWA, Hogan would be paired with Brunzell and Greg Gagne, who were trying to, help him get going. And they were the ones who, when I interviewed Greg a few years ago, he said they were the ones who pre-tore the very first shirt for Hogan, and got him to do that. And Vern and Greg and some others, I believe Billy Robinson, had told him to get over to shake and do all of this stuff, which would be the Hogan comeback. But I think Evan will appreciate if he was, I'm not sure if he was getting AWA TV at the time, but we were, and they were on at the same time for a while. And then on the same network, TV 20, they were on different days. I believe it was AWA on Sundays and Saturday was Vince's Superstars product. But Johnny Valiant was the first to manage Hogan for X amount of months. And Hogan was fresh at that point. He had done his first stint with Blassie as manager. I'll come back to the show because I want to hear what Evan thought of Hogan's first stint. He wrestled at the third and last Shea Stadium show against Andre, if I'm not mistaken. That was the one where Backlund and Morales took the titles from the Samoans off in Sika. And on top, of course, was the grudge match to end all grudge matches with Bruno over Larry Zbyszko, the pupil who turned on his... Anyway, so it was an amazing card. And I think Inoki was on that show. Evan probably may want to talk about that. But Johnny Valiant managing Hogan was... It was very unique, and I thought, well, this is kind of cool because you've got a veteran that's going to really help this kid who I saw as a gangly, sort of unathletic guy in the Mobile, and then we see him in the AWA, and then often he was advertised for X amount of shows, but he had New Japan commitments. He had gotten over really, really big. And that was probably the best place for him to go to finesse and have Inoki and Sakaguchi and Fujinami and so many others. Ricky Choshu were the primary core 4 who work with Hogan in the dojo. And, and many others, Rusher Kimura, a lot of these old IWE wrestlers who, and Shozo Strong Kobayashi, who had a stint for Vince Senior. So anyway, when that promotion died, they all went to New Japan. So Hogan made use and was given, I think Inoki really saw the promise in him via Gene LaBelle, because the first Hogan Andre, they were on a tour, or McMahon had sent them to was sending him to New Japan along with Tony Atlas, and that was primarily, Evan can correct me, that was one of the earlier guys that Hogan as a heel with Blassie as manager was facing off, and was Tony Atlas. But so they come to LA just to do a stopover en route to New Japan, and it was prior to the Shea Stadium show, and so I got to shoot Hogan and Andre there. I got to shoot them in Hawaii at the HIC Arena a little bit later. And then in the AWA, Hogan had all kinds of matches that were sort of unique. Hogan and Andre against, I think Heenan was paired with Patera and maybe Jerry Blackwell. And, at almost all of the AWA shows, anytime Hogan and Blackwell were in the ring together, way before the WWF stuff of, oh, what a big deal it is. He's lifting and picking up these guys like Bundy and Andre and slamming them. We body slammed Jerry Blackwell almost every time, and some quick memories. I'm winding this down, guys. For the Hogan was a lot of fun at the 2005. That's where I recounted and told him, backstage at some of these press events for the 2005 Los Angeles WrestleMania press deals, that I'd first seen him sort of by fluke in Mobile years before that. And at the 2015, which was, as Russell remembers, San Jose and Santa Clara. The Hall of Fame was Saturday night at San Jose Civic, the Shark Tank the next night at SoFi Stadium, brand new stadium for the San Francisco 49ers. But about 5.5 months prior to that WrestleMania in 2015, I was invited and went to a full press, early press. I guess it was for first day ticket sales for that WrestleMania. But I was just happened to be in the back door or the back area. I photographed Charlotte Flair with her NXT women's title, and a number of other guys, Booker T, and not sure if Drew McIntyre, but the British guy who's doing the commentary. Bad news, whatever. I've got some bad news. What's that guy's name in WWE? Yeah, Wade Barrett was there, and I'm talking to him, and Hogan and Jimmy Hart come from the secret door. And Hogan takes a look at like all the press, and there were some marks who had snuck in, and it was kind of a packed, smaller area at the San Jose Civic for this press deal. Again, about 5.5 months before WrestleMania 2015. And Hogan says, Jimmy, not tonight. It sounded like the Road Warriors or Jimmy Snuka. Not tonight, brother. And they went back, and I got some pictures of them posed, and then they went back out the door, not to be seen again. So several days before that WrestleMania, now we're talking April of 2015, up at the Fairmont Famous Hotel up on Nob Hill in San Francisco was where they had that major press conference. I had been talking to him, and it was like a really small corridor. So just me and Hogan talking about, a lot of stuff and what kind of media he would be doing for this. And then he kind of was in the back, and I'm standing next to him during this press conference with Stephanie. And I kept harping on her about, well, what happened to SmackDown Your Vote? This was such a big deal. You were pushing this to get people registered to vote, and I thought it was terrific. Get people to vote, no matter what party. And she was giving me some fluky answers like, well, we're a global entity now, and it looks small time if we just are trying to get Americans to vote or something like that. And I just stayed on her about it. And then when she left, and I was the one dominating the conversation because there was a lot of these sort of reporters that had 1 to 2 weeks. Evan and I've had to deal with these people for decades. 1 to 2 weeks, no true journalistic experience. I have to give Meltzer credit. He went to Fort Worth, Texas, and got his degree in journalism. Very few, if anybody, doing so-called journalism in wrestling. But anyway, so Hogan goes, he sees me like really staying on Stephanie about, staying on this and trying to get a legit and not a pre-prepared answer. And he goes, man, you were something to the effect of, Dr. Mike, you were really stiff with her. So he's like laughing because he saw me handling her like a, professional journalist for whatever that's worth. And then he posed. He was really a kind guy. It took me. I didn't appreciate it. Sometimes I thought, oh, geez, why is he always trying to find work for Jimmy Hart and Beefcake and the Nasty Boys and even Greg Valentine? But then you think, well, this guy's loyal to those folks. When he did Thunder in Paradise, he got them all paid work. And later on, he was kind of doing that with Flair at different events. And he was very kind when Flair's son Reed OD'd. He was like the first guy to call Ric Flair. And so my opinion really changed. But he was very kind. Any of these things, even dating to all the AWA stuff, because I was Leo Namalini, who was a famous Hall of Famer, 49er football player turned wrestler. He was Vern Gagne's sort of local, he called him the Northern California promoter for the AWA, but in reality, he just kind of handled PR and whatever Vern told him to do. But so I was allowed backstage, and Hogan would always say, you got enough photos of me, kid? Do you need me to do any more poses? And he said the exact same thing many, many years later. So that was, 1982. Fast forward to 2015, he says the same thing, just me and him posing in front of this WrestleMania backdrop. He's not even, wrestling or doing anything in ring for that WrestleMania, if memory serves. That was The Rock and Ronda Rousey, sort of setup thing at that Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, Northern California. But, Hogan's saying, hey, do you need me to do anything else? Do you want me to pose to the left or the right? So he made sure that I had all the photos I needed. I'm sure he did that well more for after Napolitano, but very kind guy. I mean, he set the table for so many wrestlers, pretty much everybody to follow. And it was so huge. You guys remember, I'm sure everybody hopefully were watching then, that he was Cyndi Lauper's bodyguard for like at the Grammys and a number, like 3 events he was her bodyguard for, if memory serves, before even any of this stuff happened with the Cyndi Lauper and all of the rock and wrestling, the cartoon show and all of that stuff that was happening in '84. And he really set the table. I guess it's the work smarter, not harder thing, because, he did know how to do, some moves more than what we saw in the U.S. Because if you look at him against Stan Hansen, the very first, I shot ringside at the second ever pro wrestling show at the Tokyo Dome. But the one prior, so that was New Japan versus WCW, NWA, March 21st, 1991, Flair versus Fujinami. But prior to that, the very first event at the Dome, it was a combined effort from WWF, All Japan, New Japan. They really didn't commingle. Some of the WWF wrestlers, I think like Randy Savage and DiBiase, got to work with Japanese guys, but it was mostly New Japan sending in their own matches, guys against guys. But the main event was Hogan against Stan Hansen.
You're talking about when Hogan won the International Wrestling Grand Prix stuff. Right?
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the very first show soon after the Tokyo Dome. I forget how long it had been open, and primarily it was sumo and baseball there, mainly baseball. But the very first show of wrestling was this joint show in 1990, late 1990, after the original first huge UWF of former Tiger Mask Sayama, who was a friend of Hogan's too.
But basically, his Japanese wrestling.
But what I'm saying is Hogan against Stan Hansen, and Hogan was displaying moves, chin locks and arm takedowns and standing switches. He was actually doing wrestling, which we never saw from him in WWF 80s at all. It was just the same leg drop and blah, 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 and Hogan comeback and all of that stuff. But he couldn't get away with that shit. Stan Hansen wouldn't let him get away with it. So he actually had to wrestle a decent, for his skill set match. And he was actually very proud of that afterwards. That was a huge deal for him. So, he so fond of Inoki. He often, anytime I'd pepper him with Inoki questions, he'd talk about that. So the main guys that worked with him out of that core New Japan Four, it was really Inoki and Seiji Sakaguchi, to a lesser extent Riki Choshu, and some of the ones I mentioned. And I forgot about Masa Saito, Mr. Saito, also helped Hogan because they had, and I think in part, Masa Saito helped get him that gig. You know, there were several others in New Japan. But when he was working in the AWA, you know, the infamous team with Ken Patera, so you need to look at all these different facets of Hogan. And I urge, sort of a takeaway, at least from me, is if you want to see Hogan doing different moves and actually having to wrestle a more credible match, look at that Stan Hansen Hulk Hogan. And I think you guys would be pleasantly surprised. And just for fun's sake, dig up, because everything, you know, that at least was on film, you know, so much wasn't. But watch Johnny Valiant managing him. And he was doing the vignettes before Hogan even got there. You know, the incredible Hulk Hogan. And I thought, you know, Johnny was given more time than when Vince Jr. gave him as a manager. And I thought he was doing some of his best, you know, verbal work as a manager, not, you know, the amazing stuff he did with Jimmy in the 70s, particularly that first tour, about 73 to mid 75. But those two things, I would go back and look, and I think you'll really enjoy that pairing, because it was only a couple of months, and then they quickly turned Hogan face, and sadly Johnny was gone. But Johnny was doing a great job of setting the table, getting him there. So guys, I will shut up and let you guys have your show. But yeah, it's really rough. I was impressed at the number, before I really go. All the news agencies, even this morning on the CBS Sunday Morning Show and the NBC Today Show with Willie Geist, they had tributes to Hogan. So this is day 4, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the first day when the major networks in the United States, NBC, ABC, Fox, CBS, have not had a Hogan piece, other than CBS and NBC this morning. So, you know, he got a ton of, I mean, he was if you looked at the CBS News the night he died in the morning of Thursday, last Thursday, and in the evening, CBS Evening News, you know, the half-hour national news for CBS, they have never had a segment before the main Open. And they did the Hogan tribute and then went to the Open and then did a wrap-up of him at the end of the segment. And that's so unusual. And so definitely Terry deserved it. So I'll shut up. Guys, have a great show. And R.I.P. Hulk Hogan, Terry Gene Bollea.
All right. Well, thanks for being on the show this night, Mike.
Thank you, guys.
So, wow. Well, that was quite. What I love about Mike is he went on for 23 minutes, and I interrupted him for one sentence. He was like, "Let me finish." It's like you had. I'm sorry, I took away from his diatribe for one sentence, but you know that was definitely a lot of thoughts about the history. By the way, here's my NWO Hulk Hogan pen topper here, just to show you that
you could get like $8,500 for that now, because Money Mark Mania is running wild.
I know it's but there's no shortage of Hulk Hogan, you know, schlock out there for people to you know get a hold of if they really miss it. So anyway, that was quite some thoughts from Mike about Hulk Hogan. But I'd like to turn the conversation to something very different, and that's why I want to call this show not your average Hulk Hogan Death Show. First of all, I'd like to talk about Hulk Hogan, what he means to me, if you don't mind me grabbing the pulpit and you.
I don't mind whatsoever.
I know you've done a lot of shows recently, so you've already had your brain picked pretty thoroughly as far as your thoughts go. But I still am interested, and our fans here are interested in hearing what you have to say. But let me just say, first of all, you know, it's rare in my life that you get to see somebody's career from the absolute beginning to the absolute end. You know, there's usually stuff that's missing or whatever. But a guy like Hulk Hogan didn't have anything like that. His life was pretty much an open book from the moment he walked into a wrestling ring to the moment he died. He was always in the spotlight, both because for ill or for nil. It was something that he always wanted to be in the spotlight. We didn't have many people. I mean, you say, well, there's people like Joe DiMaggio and Babe Ruth and stuff like that, but there was no, reality show featuring the family life of Babe Ruth or Joe DiMaggio.
Well, DiMaggio married Marilyn Monroe, so he was in the public eye.
He was, but there wasn't a camera following him literally into his house. And while he was, trying to deal with life with his kids, what that was all about. Hogan was in a different time where just being a celebrity like that meant that you traded in basically your life for the fame that you got, literally. I mean, 24 hours a day kind of thing, yes, when Joe DiMaggio went out to a restaurant, people bothered the hell out of him or whatever. But if he stayed home, he could be away from all that stuff. But Hogan was never away from all that, either, again, for ill or for nil. He was always thrust in the spotlight. And this is the kind of thing that, I wanted to talk about some other stuff, but in a way, I don't think we've ever seen a sports celebrity in a character be in that character their entire lives. Terry Bollea basically did not exist. He was always Hulk Hogan, always. The people talk about wrestling personas being something you turn on or you turn off, and sometimes it's an amplified version of who you are. But Hulk Hogan never wanted to be Terry Bollea once he became Hulk Hogan. Once he got the fame that Hulk Hogan was, Mike Leno was saying Hulk Hogan was Cyndi Lauper's bodyguard. But he wasn't her bodyguard. He wanted the attention. He wanted to be in the spotlight. He wasn't there to guard her body. Nobody was going to go out and assassinate Cyndi Lauper at that point in time. But he wanted to be seen. He wanted everyone to pay attention to him. There's no one who ever wanted the spotlight more in the history of the universe than Hulk Hogan. Would you agree with that? I don't think there's ever been someone that's wanted the fame as much as the fame he had as Hulk Hogan. And he wanted that fame to be there forever.
It's a valid point. I don't. There's plenty of people that crave fame, but he had it for 40 plus years. Yeah.
But it was never enough. That's why he did the Republican convention. And after he was done with the Republican convention, he had the lack of wisdom to go in front of the LA audience, the LA Staples Arena, and show up after he'd done the convention and got nothing but a huge round of boos, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
So, but going back to like the beginning of when I first saw Hulk Hogan, I saw him as Sterling Golden, but he seemed like just another big guy, okay? And it wasn't until I saw him as Thunder Lips in Rocky III that I realized that he had some greater potential, first of all, in acting, but also being not just part of the wrestling scene, but uniting the wrestling scene with popular culture, which is what being part of that Rocky film really did for him. And kind of lost in the history of all that was the fact that the AWA and Vern Gagne didn't want Hulk Hogan to be part of Rocky, and even Vince McMahon Sr. didn't want Hogan to be part of Rocky, but that was something that once he did, it changed everything. It crossed over. It was like one of the first modern instances where a big-time wrestler crossed over with a big-time movie celebrity, and it worked on both sides. It made boxing more popular and Rocky more popular. I mean, when I showed my daughter movies that I consider essential movies to watch in life, I know you would have different ones. You ever showed them to your kids or your cats, whatever. But I said, you need to watch Rocky III. Now you say, oh, but what about West Side Story and all that sort of stuff? And I understand those are important movies too. But you can't talk about the 80s without mentioning something that involved Rocky III or the actors that were a part of it. Whether you're talking about Sylvester Stallone, you're talking about Mr. T, or you're talking about Hulk Hogan, there's nothing more 80s than Rocky III.
Prince, Purple Rain.
No, you can't. You can easily talk without music without mentioning Prince and Purple Rain, but you can't talk entertainment without bringing up Rocky, Mr. T, and Hulk Hogan. They were the core of what made action entertainment, what it was in the 80s. The A-Team, wrestling, and Sylvester Stallone movies.
Michael Jackson, Billie Jean.
Michael Jackson, I think he's part of that, but he's also a big part of the 70s, and the Thriller obviously was a gigantic, huge album, but I'm just talking about the level of entertainment and talking about what those three represented towards action entertainment.
Oh, they were right up there, no doubt. Madonna, Like a Virgin, etc.
Yeah. Those are all essential parts of it, but so did Hulk Hogan ensconce himself in there. And then my dad hated wrestling. He couldn't stand it, okay? Just despised it. And I was always bringing up how wrestling was going to be a big thing to him. And he refused to acknowledge. He's like, no, it's just going to go back to the barns and the fairs and the county fairs and the gym halls and all that stuff. But there were three things that my dad believed in more than anything else as far as media went. One was the New York Times. Two was Time Magazine. Three was Sports Illustrated. And when Hulk Hogan made the cover of Sports Illustrated, that's something almost all the analysis of Hulk Hogan has just sort of glossed over. That was a big deal, especially in my house. Okay, when that cover came out and the expression on my dad's face when he opened up the little paper thing that your magazines used to come in when they mailed you, and Hulk Hogan was on the cover, it was both a sense of his expression was one of disgust and defeat. Like he was like, Russ, you're finally right. After all these years of telling me about wrestling, that wrestling was going to become super popular, the sign that Hulk Hogan was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and he's still to this date the only wrestler to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. That said something. That was the graduation, in my opinion, of wrestling from being just a side attraction to becoming a sport that people were paying attention to. The common person was paying attention to. Was that transition from being, on the cover of wrestling magazines only to being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And I think wrestling made a huge transition at that point.
Danny Hodge was also, but that was a long time prior.
And was he on specifically because he was a wrestler or because he was a martial artist?
Oh, Danny Hodge was a great amateur and professional wrestler.
I know, but I think he was featured because he was of his martial arts connection when he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
It was before my time. I'm not sure.
I think they were referring to him as far as that goes. It didn't, and it wasn't connected in the same way of that whole issue was talking about wrestling and what a huge phenomenon it was, and it sort of ushered in that whole era of it was like the preview of what would be huge. And then, of course, Hogan really was able to connect into the blood of where teenagers and adolescents were by connecting with MTV. That rock and wrestling connection, which you were a part of when you got to see Roddy Piper smash the record on top of Lou Albano's head. That whole buildup was so genius to unite two different cultures and to bring a new generation into wrestling. And Hulk Hogan was a part of that. He was part of the whole new action scene. That gone were just the matches where you'd have 20-minute headlocks and 20-minute arm bars. Instead, granted, and I told this to another friend of mine, and he totally agreed with me. Watching Hulk Hogan wrestle was the wrestling equivalent of going out to McDonald's and buying a Big Mac. Okay? No one ever said a Big Mac burger was the best burger they ever ate. Who? Anyone? I mean, anyone No, it's not a gourmet burger, but people buy billions of them because you know what you're going to get every time you order a Big Mac. It's not terrific, but it doesn't leave you hungry, and you got what you were expecting every time, like something that you just manufacture in a mold. He created manufactured wrestling in the ring in a way that nobody else ever had. Yes, wrestlers had their moves and stuff like that, but you could script a Hogan match in your sleep. It's just like you could make a Big Mac without ever working in a restaurant. They made a song about it. 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun. Well, Hulk Hogan would throw the guy into the corner, then clothesline him. Then outside the corner, he'd give him the big boot. Then off the big boot, he would do his this, he would do his that, he would point, bounce off the ropes, give the leg drop, 1, 2, 3. And I just scripted 150 endings to a Hulk Hogan match right there. Okay? I saw plenty of those matches myself, and I marked out for all of it. It was all part of just like a whole religious routine when you went to see a Hogan match. And no crowd. And I've been inside of Candlestick Park when Joe Montana would throw a touchdown to Jerry Rice. And I've been inside of arenas where Rick Barry was playing and where Steph Curry was playing. And still, I've never heard the sound that I've heard when Hulk Hogan would come out to one of those shows. The kind of fervor we all had towards Hulk Hogan was phenomenal. And the energy he created, I'm not going to just discount that because time has not been kind to him. I'm not going to pretend like that stuff didn't happen. It did. And it was motivating for people. It was something that got them to come to the shows. Even when the matches weren't very good. I mean, I was there. My other great claim to fame is I was at WrestleMania 2 live and saw the Hulk Hogan King Kong Bundy match, which when you look at it in retrospect was actually a pretty awful match. It's not very well, but everyone went crazy over it. That was there. People went absolutely nuts. Not because it was a good match, but because it delivered what we wanted in a match like that. And as far as Hulk Hogan being able to do that and to read an audience and to be able to say, this is the Big Mac match I'm going to hand to you. And you're going to love it. You're going to eat it and you're going to love it. And, a day later, you're going to forget you even had it. But it's something that, again, I'm going to be able to repeat over and over and over and over again. The problem is he just couldn't ever get out of who he was as Hulk Hogan. That was what you saw was what you got. And there wasn't anything greater than that. I mean, Hulk Hogan never played anything but Hulk Hogan in any of the movies he was in, right? I mean, it wasn't like it's not like Adam Sandler and Punch Drunk Love, right? You see Punch Drunk Love, you say, God, that is not an Adam Sandler like movie. He's
Uncut Gems.
Uncut Gems, another good example of that. There's a guy, you don't see, he's so out of what he does as a character, normally, that it's that shows reach and who you are as an actor. Hogan couldn't reach, his nose when it came to being an actor.
He wasn't going to do Lear on the British stage.
No, but you even look at Dave Bautista as another example of a guy who, once he stopped being a wrestler, said this opens up, my ability to do something so different than what I've been doing in the ring. I'd even say that The Rock has done a few things. Most of the stuff, he basically is Dwayne Johnson doing whatever, is Jungle Hunt or or the Jungle Cruise or Black Adam or what have you, you know. But he's had a few roles which have been where he's stretched, you know, who he was as a person, you know.
When I saw The Last Showgirl with Pam Anderson and Dave Bautista, I was so shocked at how great both of them were, because you never perceived them to be actors. And it was a great indie film, and it was very moving, and both got incredible praise, whereas Hulk Hogan was a B actor, basically playing Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
You know, in each of the movies. So and The Rock and Cena really need to turn down a couple of paychecks, because they've done an awful lot of crap. But the upcoming movie with Dwayne Johnson, where he plays Mark Kerr, the UFC fighter, that looks like it's going to be a winner.
Yeah, and shows that he's at least trying to stretch himself out of just being.
Well, but after you make your first 500 million and you're pushing 60 years old, you might want to challenge yourself, because you can't just do action movies your whole life.
But Hogan couldn't. I mean, he was, you know, and the fact that he was doing personal appearances, you know, just like maybe 2 months ago. In fact, there were all those people that were furious that they waited 8 hours in line to see Hulk Hogan, and then he, you know, said bye, thank you very much, and just left. And then people were paying $200 for his signature, $800 for a handshake, you know, $1,200 to have breakfast with him, kind of thing. You know, that he shouldn't have been in a position where he needed that money, where that money would have meant anything to him. And he didn't. There's a lot about Hulk Hogan that I think the reason that he just could not be famous. That was not something that his ego would allow him to do. And in that sense, it's kind of sad that, like, he was still at age 71. You would think he could have relaxed and said, I've done what I need to do, and I can, you know, do whatever I want to do because I feel like it, because it's fun, not because I have to be in the spotlight and I want to still make some kind of endorsement money while I have time left. And I just, you know, I don't want to be in that position myself. I hope you're never in that position. And it's sad that that's where Hulk Hogan found himself in.
Well, I read that he left behind a fortune of $25 million plus a mansion. So I don't think it was so much a desperate need for money. I think was more, you know, clinging to fame. And plus, you know, some people just need to be in front of people.
I think he did.
Singers need to sing, teachers need to teach, comedians need to tell jokes. And I think he needed to be Hulk Hogan. And I don't think it was so much a desperate, you know, cash deficit or anything like that.
No, I think it's more of an attention thing, that he just didn't want to ever be out of the spotlight. And, you know, that's the, but that's the other thing, is that we were you know, it always comes down when a person like Hulk Hogan dies. Can you separate the person that he was from what he did in the ring as a performer? And what I've been telling a lot of people, because a lot of people have been coming up to me and said, what do you think about Hulk Hogan dying? What do you think about Hulk Hogan dying? And my response is, I mourn the end of the era, but I don't necessarily mourn the death of Terry Bollea. I think that I miss Hulk Hogan for what Hulk Hogan meant to me as a kid, as an adolescent, as a teenager, as a young adult, as an older adult. You know, that what Hulkamania, I was part of Hulkamania. I won't pretend like I didn't care, that I was too cool for school, and that I hated Hulk Hogan because he was so over the top and cartoony. I liked that. I liked it because that's what wrestling was. That was what was making wrestling popular. And at the time, I wanted wrestling to be popular. So I was basically anything that I was for anything that would get wrestling to be on TV more, get more matches in person, make it more popular, make it mainstream. So I appreciate that. Those are things about Hulk Hogan I do. But also, you can't condemn Vince McMahon for the many evil things that he did and not equally condemn Hulk Hogan or Terry Bollea for being not just present for all those things, but he had knowledge about all that stuff. And there's a lot of evidence that he actively participated in a lot of the terrible things that Vince was part of. And I often think about it as like,
allegedly.
If Vince was the emperor, then Hulk Hogan was Darth Vader, and you couldn't have the two really working without each other. I mean, Vince needed Hulk Hogan's popularity to do what he did. But Hulk needed Vince's power to stay where he was and to keep going over in matches and winning or getting disqualified and stuff, where we keep holding that title for 4.5 straight years, And there were a lot of guys who, probably should have had title runs, like a Paul Orndorff or a Piper, or maybe, they could have put it on Morocco for a little while, just as a quick title transition, for a couple weeks, a month, something like that. But Hogan wouldn't have anything to do with that. He wanted that title held under himself, and Vince wanted that title locked down. And so there were a lot of people whose dreams were crushed and were, demoted to the lower part of the card, or that, Vince and Hogan did all those steroids together. And they openly did it. I mean, it was not something that they hid. They were very vocal about it. And they really pushed those steroids on a lot of younger guys who were smaller and wanted them to get bigger and be part of that look that Vince wanted so badly. And Hogan was really pushing that in the locker room. And lots of guys have said it. And that's a tough thing to reconcile when all these people say, Hulk Hogan was so benevolent and such a kind guy and such a wonderful person. What's your thought there, Evan?
I can't attest to what happened in locker rooms that I wasn't in, but I have my own mixed feelings about Hogan. Mike mentioned Johnny Valiant, and Johnny Valiant was a dear friend, and Johnny Valiant spoke very positively about his experiences with Hogan. Said he was very kind, and even when Hogan was on top and Johnny wasn't, they were at the same convention. I had booked Johnny as an agent. I was Johnny's agent, I should say, and Johnny approached Hogan, and Hogan hugged him and greeted him like family. And a lot of the wrestlers that I know, the legends, speak highly of Hogan. Greg Valentine certainly does. But as an old school fan who came the generation before or the decade before, I found the Hulkamania rock and wrestling era, as exciting as it was, Hogan and Piper, Slaughter and the Iron Sheik, Morocco had an incredible run beginning to mid 1980s, in the middle of all of that. Orndorff, as you mentioned, Orndorff was an all-time great. He was incredible. DiBiase a bit later. DiBiase as a heel was tremendous. Piper and Orton teaming up during the rock and wrestling era. There were some great moments. However, by the late 80s, Vince pretty much threw the baby out with the bathwater, and it was for kids, and it was mostly all characters, and NWA champions were diminished, and horse funk, Dory Funk Jr., horse funk, etc. Terry Taylor, who was climbing the ranks in the NWA as the Red Rooster. What a horrific what a horrific career-destroying gimmick that was, etc. So on. And Hogan was the face of the company during that era. And while Hogan and Orndorff, Hogan and Piper, Hogan and Savage, Hogan and DiBiase worked, eventually it became routine and it became predictable and it became
stale.
I just saw Vince and Hogan together as the beginning of the end. And yes, they drew big money, and Saturday Night Main Event with Hogan and Andre, 33 million people watched it, and that's remarkable, and it'll never be duplicated. And the alleged 93,000 for Hogan Andre at the Pontiac Silverdome, I mean, they did tend to exaggerate some of those houses, but anyway you look at it, it was a huge, huge house. Yeah, it was remarkably successful, but eventually the old school fans like myself found much of it unwatchable. And I moved on to the NWA that era, which was some of the greatest wrestling I ever saw. Flair and the Horsemen, Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, Road Warriors, Russians. At that time, Rick Rude was on the undercards. Jimmy Valiant and Superstar Billy Graham, who were main eventers in WWF, were mid-card. It was so talent-laden. That was the wrestling that I loved that era, the NWA.
What also hasn't been mentioned, you just mentioned Superstar Billy Graham, was how much Hulk Hogan ripped off Superstar Billy Graham.
Oh,
And nobody ever discredited Hulk Hogan for getting his stuff directly from Superstar. And I think it always embittered Superstar that Hulk Hogan was more successful at his own shtick than Superstar was when he invented it.
Dusty Rhodes liberally borrowed from Thunderbolt Patterson, and etc. So on. A lot of guys borrowed, but you still needed the charisma and the talent to pull it off. I have very mixed emotions about Hogan the wrestler, Hogan the pop culture icon. I mean, because basically Hulk Hogan was a B movie star. He was not doing great films by any means. There were wrestlers before and after. We mentioned Batista. We mentioned The Rock. Even Cena is very successful today. And prior, you had guys like Mike Mazurki and others. Harold Sakata, Odd Job, Professor Tanaka. There are plenty of wrestlers that made movies, and but the point is, did you make great movies or did you make commercial pablum? And for the most part, Hogan didn't, with the exception of Rocky III, which was excellent. He did not have a great filmography by any means. And
no, but he was the right guy at the right time to push the WWE message and the WWF message. And America was at that juncture where it wanted something over the top. I mean, we were in that era of Schwarzenegger films, of Stallone films, of Clint Eastwood films, of over the top Charles Bronson stuff, and all these like heavy action movies, Claude Van Damme stuff.
And in the 80s, Stallone and Van Damme and Bronson, an older Bronson, made a lot of crap movies also. I mean,
but America ate that up. It was in the mood for that. It was they wanted over the top action and the A-Team and things that were, ridiculous. I mean, you see the A-Team now and you just wonder why it had even a 1 rating. It seems so infantile and juvenile. But America ate that up at that era, and Hogan delivered that. Hogan delivered the suspension of disbelief because he was so huge, because he was so, explosive in the ring especially when he was younger. And, he had the muscles, he had the size for it. It was something that everybody bought into. And we were in that mood to buy into that. And then when he wrapped himself around the flag and became Mr. America, literally Mr. America with the mask and all that stuff. But when he was Mr. America, that was the kind of thing that, I am a real American, all that other stuff. Just that kind of jingoism. And yes, I saw that other podcast. One of the guys said he was Ronald Reagan's wrestler. He was the perfect wrestler for the Ronald Reagan era. And it just all fed into that. It was something that came to just sort of a groundswell. It was like a volcano that just exploded with all this like hyper action, color, over the top kind of, hyperbole. Like a living example of human hyperbole was Hulk Hogan. And the fact that he delivered something that you could set your watch to, that was predictable, that was, not very challenging to watch. You could just watch it and watch it for the surface of what it was. That was the kind of thing that America wanted to be entertained by in that 80s time frame. It fit so well with the mental makeup of what made America entertained in that time frame. But that is what I mourn with the loss of Hulk Hogan. Not so much Terry Bollea is gone, but part of my childhood, part of what I grew up on, part of what made me a wrestling fan. I know you were different because you were following more of the old school stuff, but for me, because he made wrestling such a big thing, and because we're even here talking about wrestling today, is due to Hulk Hogan's influence. And so I give a tribute to that, not so much as I give a tribute to the man behind that. And I don't know who will understand that, or if you understand that, or if anyone understands it.
I get it. I had friends this week who were a bit younger than me tell me they were crying. They were devastated. It's a piece of their childhood. And I felt it when Bruno died a few years back. I felt it when Superstar Billy Graham died not that long ago, because those were my childhood wrestling heroes. And I totally get it. It's a piece of your youth, a piece of your childhood, and you lived through some great moments and some fun times. And not in your case, but in many of our cases, we went to wrestling with our fathers or uncles or aunts or grandparents, whoever the case may be. And you identify.
Well, for me, it's with my brother. Your
brother's still here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saying when I look back at my childhood, some of the greatest nights were going with my father to wrestling, and he's no longer here. So let me add this, because it really wasn't addressed too much during the show. When I first saw Hogan in WWF and later WWF, late 70s going into 1980, he came in as a heel, and he was pretty green, and he didn't even get a shot at Backlund at the Garden. He was not the big deal that he would later become. He did get title shots at other arenas throughout the circuit, but not at Madison Square Garden. But when I finally said this guy's got something, Nassau Coliseum was really the B circuit. It never touched the Garden as far as attendance, not even close. And when heel Hogan wrestled face Andre headlining the Nassau Coliseum, and they broke 10,000, I was sitting there, I was like, wow, this is, the attendance was like 5 times what it usually was, or whatever the case may be. It was not a big drawing venue. And I said, this guy's got something. And the charisma was there, and the size was there. And the Battle of the Giants is how they very Vince went back to that well years later for WrestleMania 3 and just flipped it. He just flipped it. Face Hogan against heel Andre, and boy,
it probably became the most iconic match in wrestling history.
And it wasn't that great a match, but
nope, but it's still one that.
Yeah, people don't really think of it that way. They think of the event, the excitement, the hype, the charisma, the build-up, the slam, which had been done many, many times.
Right.
Don Leo, Jonathan, and Harley Race, many guys had
Kamala even slammed Andre the Giant before.
Yeah. So Vince in his own way was a marketing genius, and him and Hogan were the right combination. But you also should add, without guys like the Iron Sheik, without guys like Roddy Piper, without a Randy Savage, Hogan, James Bond needs Blofeld. Superman needs Lex Luthor. Batman needs the Joker. Yes. So it's
even your buddy Nikolai Volkov. Even your buddy Nikolai Volkov,
Hogan wrestled everybody in that era.
Sure. But that it was the whole U.S. versus Russia thing was a huge, angle of what he was part of. And then he turned around by all those people that helped him get to where he was, and then shot down the whole idea of unions. And there's no doubt that if he had stood up with the rest of the wrestlers against Vince McMahon, that a union would have been created. And without that, that's the kind of thing that unfortunately set wrestling back, or puts wrestling still in that shady realm of the independent contractor and the wrestlers that don't have insurance. Because Hulk Hogan had his. You didn't want to see anything that he had be endangered by changing the status quo. And that sort of insistence, has implications well into today and definitely into wrestling's future. And that's another thing that, Hulk Hogan has to answer for, or Terry Bollea has to answer for, is that steadfast denial of wanting to, unionize and to spread the benefits of what the WWE has to the other next generation. Well, the lower echelons of his generation and to the wrestlers of the next generation. And,
to this day, wrestlers from that generation are dying, needing GoFundMes to cover their burials. It's disgraceful.
Right.
That's Vince.
And and Vince couldn't have done it without the help of his Darth Vader, which was Hulk Hogan. I mean, Hulk Hogan carried the weight in the locker room and was able to, intimidate a lot of those guys into denying the existence of a wrestling union. And
Jesse Ventura publicly said that Hogan snitched him out because Ventura wanted to create the union. And obviously, he became a governor later, so he was political. And again, with celebrities, you have to separate the celebrity from the flawed individual, the flawed human being, and make a decision. You draw a line in the sand. Can you enjoy their work? Can you support them? And Hogan did a lot of good things, and Hogan did some not so good things. And
but the time when we were enjoying Hulk Hogan the most, and goes back to like your James Brown stuff when you've talked about James Brown, is like, or Michael Jackson is another perfect example. The time that you were really enjoying James Brown music, or watching Hulk Hogan, or listening to Michael Jackson, you didn't know what a crazy MFer they were. You didn't know when you were listening to.
Well, James Brown had run-ins with the law, and James Brown was locked up for a while.
But people didn't know all about, what a wife abuser he was and all that stuff until after he died. I mean, not all the truth of it. No one knows any of the whole truth about anybody until after they die. It's going to come out about me after I kick the bucket. But, it's hard to look back retroactively on what you know now about certain people and then judge how you enjoyed them when you were younger, when you had no sign that these people were evil or doing anything bad.
Well, the point I was going to make is I cannot watch a Chris Benoit match to this day. I just can't watch. I just can't get the image of him killing his wife, killing his kid, killing himself. It's just too sordid and tragic. And there's a line there. I can enjoy a James Brown performance. I can't look at a Bill Cosby at this point, but people will say, rightfully so, he's on the Mount Rushmore of stand-up comedians. Him and Richard Pryor and George Carlin. You can't take away what a great comedian he was, and you can't take away how huge his show was. That was also from that same era, the Cosby Show. But I can't look at the guy. So my point being, hey, look, Bruce Lee's one of my heroes. He collapsed at his mistress's house and died. He had a loving wife and kids. That Muhammad Ali was one of my heroes. At a press conference, he introduces his wife, only it wasn't his wife.
I remember that.
It was his mistress. So my point being, I could enjoy a Muhammad Ali match, watching an old match at this point. It's where you as the fan, you as the adult, you with your own. I would never endorse anybody abusing anybody or whatnot, but for whatever reason, I can enjoy a James Brown performance. I cannot enjoy a Chris Benoit performance. And people have to make up their mind with Hogan. There was an article that I read yesterday. The title of the article was Hulk Hogan was a terrible man or something like that. And it's very simplistic, because the guy made tons of Make-A-Wish appearances for dying and sick kids. He helped a lot of people along the way. He was kind to a lot of wrestlers who verbalized just that. I have friends in the industry in various capacities who told me how good and nice and kind Hulk Hogan. Mike Lano just said the same thing just less than an hour ago. So, people are complicated. People have a good side, a bad side. People do good things, bad things, stupid things, wonderful things. And the legacy is there, and it's up to you to enjoy it or not enjoy it or ignore it or whatever. It's your call. It's your call. But you can't take away the fact that he was a huge star and he had incredible charisma.
And he embodied an entire era. That is one thing. Anyway, we've gone over, but I really appreciate your input, especially since you've already done a couple other shows about this, and I'm sure you're going to maybe do a couple more, before all said and done. But I
did Canadian TV on their morning show, 7:37 in the morning Friday, and when they asked me about the scandals, you tread very gingerly because it's reaching a lot of people, and you don't want to just savage somebody because he did have two sides to him, and you have to. People are complicated. Even Bill Cosby gave millions and millions of dollars to charity, right? And I would not say this was a nice man, knowing the other side that came out publicly, but this guy gave millions upon millions of dollars to charities. And,
to his college and all that stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So people are complex.
They are. But anyway, I really appreciate it. Why don't you go ahead and plug your book one last time while we're on the air here?
Sure. Wrestling rings, blackboards, and movie sets. 100 plus stories about my life in film, in education as a teacher, in wrestling as an agent, etc. So on. Making the movie The Wrestler, doing 350 days.
That Hulk Hogan was not going to be cast in.
I never once heard Hulk Hogan mention the entire 6 years that we were working on The Wrestler. Not once. And I did 6 casting calls on top of it. So
we can take that as a pretty good source. That was another one of Hulk Hogan's great lies, but we'll keep moving from there.
Interestingly, people are not aware of this, but Mickey Rourke got a lot of that character from Greg Valentine. They spent a lot of time together.
I'm not surprised.
And even the look of Randy the Ram, you could see some Greg Valentine in him.
Very interesting. So also talk about your grab bags real quick.
Yeah, I have some wrestling grab bags and some grab bags of my old sheet, Wrestling Then and Now. And you could also check out the documentary, Wrestling Then and Now in 350 Days. It's still out there. And just come over to my page, Evan, EVAN Ginsburg, GINZBURG, on Facebook. And yeah, we're doing like a clearance this summer because my wife, the 2 cats have taken over the house.
Yeah, cats needs room. Exactly.
That's right. We're in a 1-bedroom apartment, and the cats have taken over. So my wife wants me to get rid of stuff. So my loss is sure gain.
Yes, and the cats gain too. Anyway, great to have you, and we'll see everyone next week. Good night, everyone.